Korean Jokbo and the Chinese Jokbo are completely different objectives and purpose in writing them. The Chinese Jokbo simply gives you the marriage connection, but the Korean Jokbo connects lineages and gives you enough resource that you can find more information about the wife. Hello, this is Mark Peterson with the Frog Outside the Well Research Center. Today I'm going to make two recordings, one in English and one in Korean, on a similar topic. But the one in English is going to be called Korean Jokbo and Chinese Jokbo. Not at all the same, completely different kinds of documents. They have the same format, the same shape, but the content is completely different. That's what the first video is about. Then I'll make another one in Korean about the value of the women's records in the Korean Jokbo compared to the Jokbo and whatever other sources. Anyway, here's a typical page of a typical Jokbo. You see the lines here and the generations and the data. Everything goes down and to the left. That's a basic principle. Let's look at this top line in a little bit of detail here. And we see the character at the top, be, means to marry, or indication of a wife here. And at the bottom of that line, you see the character she, meaning of this clan. And in the middle, it says Andong Kim, she, that this is the wife of this first man, whose name is Hwan Jo. So the point is that the Jokbo gives a record of the wife and the wife's family in the background. What all do we have about this woman? Well, let's look at it in a little more detail. In this case, this family, this Jokbo is very good. They keep all four ancestors, the father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and the maternal grandfather, which is a gold mine of information when you think about it. And that's what those blue looking glass symbols are there. The father, the grandfather, the great-grandfather, and the maternal grandfather. So on this page, we've got 5 men and 7 wives, because 2 of them remarried. And why do you remarry in Korea? Well, the first wife dies, and you need the wife to take care of the children. Childbirth was fatal for a lot of women, and so very often you see 2 wives, sometimes 3 wives, but they were never simultaneous. Now, a man could have another liaison, a mistress or a concubine, or what we best call a secondary wife, but she would never be in the Jokbo. Never, never, never. Her children may or may not be, but they're labeled as soja, or they're not labeled, but they're put in after all the other children, so you can figure it out anyway. But the real wives, you can only have 1, but you could have 2 if the first one died, 3 if the second one died. So in this page here, we see that this family lists the sajo, the 4 ancestors for each of the wives. So in other words, the sajo, or the 3 ascending patrilineal line, the father, grandfather, great-grandfather, then you have the maternal grandfather. So if you have this case here with 5 men and 7 wives, the 7 wives also have the names of 21 men, their father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and you have 7 maternal grandfathers. So on this particular page, we see that the wife is an Andong Kim, and the maternal grandfather is a Hamyang Pak. And in the second line, the wife is a Hanyang I, and the maternal grandfather is a Yenan Kim. And on down the way, you have a Chungpung Kim and a Kige Yu. Then you have a Chunju I and a Ponjong Chung. Now, Ponjong Chung is a funny way to put it. This is a Yanil Chung family, so that means Yanil Chung. And so on each line, you have the wife's family and the wife's maternal family indicated. So you have not just the wife's name, but you have 3 times the wife's name, 3x, with the father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. And then you have the 7 maternal grandfathers. So you've got a lot of information about the wife on this Jokbo. In fact, if you look at it seriously, there are more information about the women than about the men, which runs counter to what most Koreans will tell you about Jokbo. They'll say, oh, the women were ignored. And there are some Jokbo that ignore the daughters somewhat, but they tend not to ignore the wives because those are important liaisons and those are important reason for keeping the Jokbo, was that to show that your marriages were of a proper social level and it's a status symbol, you see. So one other factor you'll get from time to time is not only do you have the 4 ancestors, but you'll sometimes get a figure that says, and she is descended from so-and-so, a famous ancestor. That's another piece of information, a very valuable piece of information. More women's information that is very important in doing family history research. So there's a lot of information about the women on a Korean Jokbo, and you do not have this in the case of the Chinese Jokbo. So in the Korean Jokbo, you have information about wives, you have daughters-in-law, you have grandmothers, great-grandmothers, a lot of information about the women in the Jokbo. How's this different from the Chinese Japu? It's completely different. Completely different. The Chinese Japu comes in 5 styles. This page I borrowed off of Family Search, and here it lists the 5 different styles. None of them are like the Korean Jokbo. The Jokbo is a completely different style from these, and if you look at the first page, you see these lines, these generation lines, you think, that's similar. And here you see the generation lines, you think, that's similar, but it's not. It's not. The women's data is completely different. The content is completely different. You look at this one, and here's the man, and here's the wife, here's the man, and here's the wife, but that's it. There's no connection to the wife's ancestral home or to the wife's relatives. Sometimes you have a wife's father, but you never go up the line like you do in Korea. Here's another style of Jokbo, or of Japu, and here's another, just a line chart. Koreans do this, but it's sort of an introductory page in the Jokbo sometimes. And then here's a narrative just saying so-and-so had children and so-and-so, etc. So those are the 5 different styles of Jokbo. The key difference is Chinese don't have a Bongwan. There's no Bongwan concept in China, and the Bongwan concept in Korea is everything. It's everything. In the Korean Jokbo, when the wife is listed, she's always listed by Bongwan. If it, maybe 1 or 2 times out of 100, it'll just say Kim Shi or Yi Shi without a Bongwan. But that's very, very rare and very, very insufficient. In almost every case, you have a Bongwan, and in well over 90% of the cases, you have the wife's father, who is the Sadon. The Sadon's a very important word in Korean because it's the 2 men at the wedding, the father of the bride and the father of the groom. It's the 2 grandfathers when the child is born. That's a relationship, and there's a word for it in Korean. It's Sadon. We don't have that word in English. We dance around the term. Oh, that's my daughter's father-in-law. Oh, those are the in-laws of my children. We don't have a word for Sadon, but Sadon is a very, very important concept in Korean. It's the 2 fathers of the bride and the groom, and the 2 grandfathers of the first grandchild and all the grandchildren that are born. And this Sadon relationship is very, very important. Years ago, a Korean friend of mine had a daughter who wanted to marry an American boy. And the man was just dead set against it. Not my daughter. No international marriage for my daughter. And then he found out that the boy's father was a professor at BYU. And he thought, well, that's not so bad. And then he found out that I was distantly related to that professor. That I was, what was I? My mother's second cousin was married to this professor. And so that made me, in the Korean concept, Sadon Kiri, a relationship through Sadon. And this man said, well, I think she's going to marry him anyway. But the fact that now you and I can be Sadon, that makes it okay. You see? So this idea of Sadon is a very strong concept in Korea. And the Sadon is reckoned by Bongwan. You see who is connected by this Bongwan concept. Bongwan, in case you haven't caught up to this by now, is the ancestral home of every Korean. And there are lots and lots of Kims, but they're not all the same. There's Kyungju Kim, there's Kim Hae Kim, there's Andong Kim, and they're separate by these Bongwan. The Bongwan is a place name but it's not where they live. It's different from Kohyang. Kohyang is hometown. And there are many people who don't even know where their Bongwan is. And there are many people who have never been to their Bongwan. And there's some Bongwan in North Korea that, you just don't have access to. But a lot of people don't even know where their Bongwan is, but it's a name that's attached to their surname that separates their Kims from all the other Kims, their E's from all the other E's. So the Bongwan is very, very important, and the Chinese don't have the Bongwan system. And the whole point of the Jokbo is to keep track of people by their Bongwan. And the Chinese don't. They have a very different concept toward looking at what the Jokbo is about. So in other words, Koreans keep track of their affinal ties. And affine is your wife's family, your woman's family. And these affinal ties, Saton that we were talking about, these are very, very important in the Korean identity of family. And so the purpose of the Bongwan and the reference to the wife by Bongwan is to make this wife traceable. So you can go back and look her up in the Jokbo, in her Jokbo. So you're looking in the husband's Jokbo and you want to know about this wife. Well, there's a lot of information there. It tells you her Bongwan, it tells you her age, her birth and death date, it tells you where she's buried. But more importantly, it tells you who her father is. Her father and the groom's father are the Saton. And then it tells you her great-grandfather and her great-great-grandfather and her maternal grandfather, which tells you the name of her mother. And all this information is available in the Korean Jokbo that's not in the Chinese Jokbo. It's a thing that makes the wife traceable and findable in her own Jokbo. And that's the key difference. So anyway, that's the bottom line, that the Korean Jokbo and the Chinese Jokbo are completely different objectives and purpose in writing them. The Chinese Jokbo simply gives you the marriage connection, but the Korean Jokbo connects lineages and gives you enough resource that you can find more information about the wife, detailed information about the wife. So that's the major difference between the Korean Jokbo and the Chinese Jokbo. The reason I'm doing this is I had assumed, like everyone else, that they're all the same, they look the same, they got the generation lines, and they're all written in Chinese. And I had two different organizations that I've been consulting with lately. Both of them are saying that, Chinese Jokbo and Korean Jokbo about the same. And I started looking at, they're not the same at all. The format looks the same, but the content is completely different. It serves a completely different purpose. So I thought that would be a useful YouTube for you today. And that's it. And I'll do another one now in Korean about how you can find wives' information in the Jokbo. So we'll see you later. Bye.